Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastabhute Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswatunde Ve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskatyade Siddharne. I'm going to read the seventh from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, Knowledge of the Absolute, text number 1. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Maya Saktamanat Parata Yogam Yunjanmanashraya Asamshayam Samagramam Itagyasasi Tatchinu. Supreme Personality of God had said, "Oh, now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt." Prabhupada's purport. In the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the nature of Krishna consciousness is fully described. Krishna is full in all opulences, and how he manifests such opulences is described herein. Also, 4 kinds of unfortunate people who never take to Krishna are described in this chapter. In the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the living entity has been described as non-material spirit soul, capable of elevating himself to self-realization by different kinds of yogas, or different types of yogas. At the end of the 6 chapters, it has been clearly stated that the steady concentration in the mind upon Krishna, in other words, Krishna consciousness, is the highest form of all yoga. By concentrating one's mind upon Krishna, one is able to know the absolute truth completely, but not otherwise. Impersonal Brahmajyoti, or localized Paramatma realization, is not perfect knowledge, because it is partial. Full and scientific knowledge is Krishna, and everything is revealed to the person in Krishna consciousness. In complete Krishna consciousness, one knows that Krishna is the ultimate knowledge beyond any doubts. Different types of yoga are only stepping stones on the path of Krishna consciousness. One who takes directly to Krishna consciousness automatically knows about Brahmajyoti and Paramatma in full. By practice of Krishna consciousness yoga, one can know everything in full, namely the absolute truth, the living entities, material nature, and their manifestations with paraphernalia. One should therefore begin yoga practice as directed in the last verse of the 6th chapter. Concentration in the mind upon Krishna is made possible by prescribed devotional service in 9 different forms, of which Shravanam is the first and most important. The Lord therefore says to Arjuna, "Touch Shinu," or hear from it. No one can be a greater authority than Krishna, and therefore by hearing from him, one receives the greatest opportunity to become a perfectly Krishna conscious person. One has therefore to learn from Krishna directly, or from a pure devotee of Krishna, and not from a non-devotee upstart puffed up with academic education. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, this process of understanding Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, is described in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto as follows. Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravanam Kirtana Vidyan Taksto Hi Abhajani Vidunoti Saritsatam Nashta Prayeshvabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtiki Tadarajastamo Bhava Kamaralobadarastaye Chete Taranavidam Stitam Satvaye Prasidati. Evam prasanamanaso bhagavad bhakti yoga taha bhagavatatva vijnana mukta sanghasya jayate vidyate hridya grantis vidyante sarva samshaya shriyante chastikaramani dristeva namnishare. To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as the best wishing friend, and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing about him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. A development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion, ignorance, and thus material lust and avarice are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. As Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of a samshayam, samagram, understanding the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead. The Bhagavatam 1:17-21. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness, one understands the science of Krishna. So the verse again, Maya Saktamanak Partha Yogam Yunjan Marashaya Asamsham Samagramam Yata Gyasasi Tatjinu. Supreme Personality of God had said, now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. Om Agyanatamirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksura Unalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Bhagavad Gita, as Prabhupada writes in the introduction, is also known as the Gita Upanishad, which is a summary of all the Vedic knowledge. Prabhupada questioned what was the necessity of his writing another commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. After all, at the time of his writing the commentary, which he had to do twice, first time it was in India, when he came to America, his Bhagavad Gita that he had completed got stolen. Why someone stole the Bhagavad Gita is a little hard to understand. A lot of times it's hard to give them away, but someone decided to steal it. Hopefully he read the commentary and maybe he's a devotee now. But in any case, Prabhupada's first commentary was stolen, and then he had to rewrite the Bhagavad Gita while he was in America. Now, Prabhupada said that at the time that he wrote the Bhagavad Gita, there were always over 600 or 700 commentaries in English alone, both in India and in America. And one lady, American lady, asked him to recommend an edition of the Bhagavad Gita in English. But he said he couldn't do it because none of the Bhagavad Gitas that he was familiar with, had been familiar with, touched on the spirit of the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada said the spirit of the Bhagavad Gita is, ultimately Prabhupada said, is Krishna is explaining how he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, if God wants to explain that he's God, it's quite easy for him. For a conditioned soul to understand that Krishna is God is not so easy. But it's possible if one hears from Krishna directly how he explains the fact that he's God. Conditioned soul means just like if you're in prison, it's very hard to move around outside the prison because you're locked in the prison. Similarly, conditioned soul means that one is imprisoned by the material modes of nature, and therefore, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Naham prakasha sarvasha yoga maya samavrita mudoyam navijananti lokoyam ajam avyam, that he's never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them, he's covered by his creative potency, yoga maya, and so the deluded world knows me not. I'm unborn and inexhaustible. So first of all, we have to understand who are the persons who are deluded. Now, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita will explain that in his first instruction to Arjuna that Nitvevaham jatuna sam nitveme ne jadadipa, nichayvana bhavishama sarvevayama tatparam. That never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So that's quite good news that we're all eternal. But how many of us have realized that completely? In other words, if we identify ourselves and we look in the mirror and we think this is me, that means we're not seeing things properly. That means that there must be some energy which is influencing us to think improperly or incorrectly. And Krishna says that's Maya. If Krishna is correct, and in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna will explain basically only three things, three subject matters. Of course, he says that there are five, namely Ishvara, the Supreme. There's the Jiva, the living entity. There's Prakriti, the material nature. There's Kala, there's time. And then there's karma, or activities. But basically speaking, the purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to explain three things, namely Brahman, the fact that we're eternal souls, we're not this body. Paramatma, that we have a guide to help us realize we're not this body. His name is Paramatma. He's in everyone's heart. And Bhagavan, that the ultimate goal Paramatma wants to guide us towards is this form as Bhagavan, that we all have an eternal relationship with Paramatma in the material world. And ultimately, it means we have an eternal relationship with Bhagavan, or Krishna, whom Paramatma is just an expansion. We can't exist without a relation with Krishna. We can imagine that we have relationships apart from Krishna, but that's called illusion. We have relationships, obviously, in the material world, friends and enemies, and indifferent and partial, husband and wife, children. But these relationships are all basically founded on a relationship with Krishna, as Paramatma, for instance, here. Because without the help of Paramatma, we can't remember anything. And even when we try to forget something, we can't forget something. I may be disturbed by the fact that I lost my pen, but what is my pen? I'm convinced it's not very important, but my mind keeps on bringing it up and agitating me that I lost my pen. But I'm trying to forget it, but I can't do it. So if I was actually in control of my memory, I just say, forget it, but I can't because I'm not even in control of my memory. And sometimes I'm trying to figure out where I left my keys or my wallet, and I can't do it. So I start praying to Krishna or Hanuman or someone, please help me remember. And then suddenly it pops in my mind, and I say, thank you, God, you're very kind. Therefore, remembrance and forgetfulness, and what to speak of knowledge, we look around, and if we see through the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita that the body's changing, but we're not changing, then we realize that there's nothing to worry about. But when I forget that, then I'm in a material world, in a material experience, in a kind of material pastime where I become a body. Sometimes, as I said before, we enter into the temple and we pick up our halo on the way in. And we have a halo when we're sitting there in class and everything is good. And then when we leave the class, two little horns pop up and a tail in the back. And we become a material body again with the material pastimes. So this is knowledge. It's being supplied to us, just like a teacher is speaking to his student or the father is instructing his son. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is instructing us eternal knowledge, namely Brahman, the fact that we're eternal souls. Paramatma, and we can take shelter of the Supreme Lord within the heart, was also speaking the same message externally on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, speaking to Arjuna knowledge of Brahman and his existence as Paramatma within our heart, and ultimately the goal of life is to reach Bhagavan, Krishna. So that's the spirit of the Bhagavad Gita. That's why Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. Not so that later on they can print millions of Bhagavad Gitas and we can sell them and get some money so we can have some bhoga to offer to the deity. That was not the purpose of Krishna speaking the Bhagavad Gita, so we can have a best-selling book and we can get some money and support the temple. He spoke Bhagavad Gita so that Arjuna could understand his eternal relationship with Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So that's the spirit of the Bhagavad Gita, to understand Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, and the methods to understand these three things. Now, Prabhupada writes in the introduction that if we want to take a medicine, we have to take it according to the instructions on the label of the bottle or according to the expert physician. We cannot invent our own method of taking the medicine. So the fact that Krishna is God and the method of realizing him is explained in the Bhagavad Gita. If we don't like what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, and we decide that I'm going to take my own medicine, whatever Krishna says, he said some nice things. He said to give up all varieties of religion at the end, and I've already done that, so I'm on my way for perfection. As far as surrendering to him, that's a little difficult. Giving up religion is easy, but surrendering to him is a little difficult. So we may take what we like from the Bhagavad Gita and reject what we don't like. But that's not the Bhagavad Gita. If Krishna is the expert physician, we have to follow the entire process that Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita and try to understand it. And there are other authorities who have agreed with Krishna, such as Sankaracharya, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, and later on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. They've agreed that Krishna is the Supreme and that the methodology that Krishna explains is the process of realizing. First of all, even Krishna may be far away or distant. Even Paramatma we may not be very much in connection with. But the fact that we're eternal should be obvious. And that's the pivotal point to becoming a human being. If one does not understand he's eternal, different from the body, then there's nothing much to do in this material world except to eat, sleep, mate, and defend. And maybe make some arrangements so we can eat, sleep, mate, and defend better. Or we may be dissatisfied with so much eating, sleeping, mating, defending, and try to regulate it in a way that we're not so much agitated by these desires. So that's called the modes of ignorance, the modes of passion, and the mode of goodness. When we're in that mood, when we're in that conception, then everything is relative. In other words, as they say, what one person's food is another person's poison. Everything here in the material world, in our pastime or our activities as embodied souls, what's good for one body at one moment may not be good the next moment. What's good for one embodied soul may be not good for another embodied soul. And therefore people fight over what they think is good for their relative existence in the material world. For instance, in Africa, there's a tribe, they believe that if you're alive, you're good. But if you're dead, you're bad. So that's a very simple philosophy, materialistic philosophy. So if I kill you, I become good because I'm alive, and you're bad because you're dead. One does not have to go through a whole lot of training of morality or ethics or anything. Very simple philosophy. But it is not an absolute philosophy, but it's a materialistic philosophy, relative. Absolute philosophy is true for everyone at all times, past, present, and future. So the fact that everyone has a body that's changing, and yet the soul within the body is not changing, that's absolute knowledge, not relative knowledge. The fact that there's a Paramatma guiding all living entities, no matter what their situation is. Here in the material world, we have our friends, and also we have our enemies. Now, someone may pick my pocket, and if I have some money in my pocket, they become my enemy. But that does not mean that they're not a spirit soul anymore. Now that you've picked my pocket, your status as a spirit soul has been revoked. You now become a material body because of your sinful activity. No, there's still a spiritual soul, and their actual benefit in life is not really to take money from me. Their actual benefit of life is to become realized as a spiritual being. Therefore, for one who has knowledge, their interactions with people in the material world, which are always going to be relative, is not taken as the primary emphasis in their activities. For instance, the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Samam sarveshu bhuteshu tishtantam parameshwaram vinashavana vanashantam yak pashyati sapashyati. So this is the vision we have to develop by experience. Krishna may say, for instance, samam sarveshu bhuteshu, that one who can see the soul within all bodies, along with the super soul, and knows that neither the soul nor the super soul within the indestructible body is ever destroyed, actually sees. In other words, that is absolute philosophy. Now, unfortunately, because we're in the material world, we have a material mind. And the material mind will concoct so many different things. And this is a good person, this is a bad person, this is a useless person for me. And therefore, instead of realizing the fact that someone may be good from a relative point of view, or may be bad, or may be useless to us, but still they're a spiritual being. And therefore, if we're a devotee of Krishna, then our main duty, first of all, is to interact with them appropriately. We don't think a tiger is a spirit soul and therefore go into the cage and embrace him and pay obeisances, asking for forgiveness for our offenses, thinking that he was a dirty tiger rather than a spiritual being. That's an inappropriate behavior unless you're a Mahabhagavad, like Murari Chaitanya Das. He went into the forest sometimes and he'd find a tiger and he'd slap him across the face. The tiger did not eat him, but would begin to purr because when Murari Chaitanya Das, his hand touched the tiger was in ecstasy. Now we slap a tiger in the jungle across the face. I don't think the tiger will be in ecstasy. nor would be in ecstasy. Murray Chaitanya Das would also put venomous snakes on his lap and play with them, but it's not recommended that a neophyte devotee do that. So we have to work appropriately, but we should not forget reality, what our purpose of life is, and not get disturbed by other people's behavior. Otherwise, if we're disturbed by other people's behavior and don't stick to what our behavior should be to realize who we are and our relation with Krishna, then we waste our time interacting only on a relative platform with others. Therefore, Krishna says, Samam Pashanhi Sarvatra, Samavashtati, Samam Pashanhi Sarvatra, Samavastati Ishvaram, Nihinnasyatmanatmanam Tatoyati Param Yatim. That one who can see the super soul accompanying all souls in all bodies does not degrade himself by the mind, but thus he approaches the transcendental destination. So this we cannot forget. We should not forget appropriate interactions with others. That takes some intelligence, but we should not forget that we're dealing with souls also, and that ultimately the super soul is guiding everyone, that nothing happens by accident. And therefore we should not become overly disturbed by other people's behavior, nor should we become overly elated by their behavior. We should understand that somehow or another, everyone is an instrument for Krishna. Then we won't degrade ourselves within our mind, which basically speaking, to see things outside of Krishna consciousness. It's like when the soul is with Krishna, he's in the fire of spiritual life. But if he decides by seeing things outside of Krishna, when he rejects Krishna consciousness and sees things differently, then he's in one of the modes of material nature. And according to the mode of material nature, one has to either be peaceful or suffer or be bewildered. So that's the difference between the being in material consciousness and being in spiritual consciousness. Now, Krishna is absolute in the sense that the soul is absolutely eternal. Otherwise, we'd be changing, we wouldn't be here. We couldn't talk. If we were changing all the time, then you'd have a different speaker and I have a different audience at every moment. But we have the same speaker, the same audience, because it's the soul who's listening. And I can only speak and you can only listen and understand because of the intelligence given by the super soul within our heart. And ultimately, our subject matter is about Krishna. Now, people may believe that there is a God called Krishna, or they may not believe. But then again, how did the super soul get in our heart? In other words, if we can understand that I'm eternal and that there's a soul, super soul guiding me, then why is he there? And how is it that someone could be in everyone's heart at the same time, giving everyone remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness? Can it be that that person, his only business is to guide the conditioned souls, either to self-realization or to material conceptions of life? As we understand, as the logic is, obviously the super soul is quite powerful because he's created this world. He's moving the planets in their orbits. He's given us a variety of material bodies to suffer or enjoy in. But what is it all about? And where did he come from? If we all had a father and mother, as we've heard before, and they had a father and mother, and they had and our grandparents had fathers and mothers. How can the original father and mother not be a person? If we're persons, then how could the original father and mother not also be a person? How is it possible that we trace back our ancestry and we find out that one of our fathers and mothers was a monkey, grandfathers, and that they came from a sheep, they came from a rock, they came out of nothing? It makes no sense. Otherwise, why don't more rocks make more sheep? Why don't sheep make more monkeys? Why do monkeys not make more people, human beings? Now it's clear that the original father and mother are persons just like we are. The difference is that they're the supreme, the source of everything. Now in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains why he created the material world, why we're here, what the actual goal of life is, and how to achieve it. That knowledge is, in other words, we don't know if Krishna is God perfectly. Intellectually, we're supposed to try to understand that, because at the present moment, all we have to guide us is our intelligence. And according to the intelligence that we have, we make different decisions. If we reject the fact that Krishna is God, or that we're souls, or that Paramatma is there to guide us towards Krishna, if we absolutely reject that, and we do that, then we just forget about the whole philosophy of Krishna consciousness. That's more or less what we do, is to reject the whole thing. We just forget about everything, and we just go on with our conception that I'm this body, and that I have to make money, I have to enjoy in the material world, and I have to make sure I live here as long as possible, so I can go on making money and trying to enjoy. So once we forget Krishna consciousness, then we have another conception of life, and we'll act accordingly. And if we remember Krishna consciousness, then we may not realize everything, but we realize something, enough to make a decision, for instance, to chant Hare Krishna, which is the main process, or to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, worship the deities, try to make the atmosphere spiritual by putting Krishna in our heart, and try to serve the devotees and the mission of Krishna. So when we have that conception, then we do activities which are aligned with getting out of the ignorant misconceptions that we have. And when we forget that, then we have activities which are aligned with absorbing ourselves in the material conceptions of life. Now we can eat in Krishna consciousness. We can even sleep in Krishna consciousness. Now, amazingly enough, the devotees, if they have a dream about Krishna, they take that as more significant than even thinking about Krishna when they're awake. The devotees talk about their experience in their dreamlike state more than they talk about their experience of Krishna when they're awake. But that's all right, because we can dream about Krishna, and in a more advanced state of consciousness, even in our dream, even when we're asleep, we'll think about Krishna. And also mating is there. Mating can be there in Krishna as service to produce Krishna conscious children. And similarly, defending should be there also, because when we have to defend ourselves against the illusory energy. The material nature is not our enemy, but material nature is there to make sure that we're sincere devotees of Krishna, otherwise she'll chastise us. So we have to make sure that we remain good, law-abiding citizens of Krishna's service, and therefore defend ourselves against being overwhelmed by the illusions that Maya presents us. So this knowledge, we can understand how Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead as it's normally understood, that being the source of everything, he must have all beauty, all fame, all knowledge, all strength, all wealth, and all renunciation. If he's the source of everything, he must have these things in full. But at the present time, we cannot see Krishna. Therefore, we cannot see how he's controlling the universe perfectly. Maybe theoretically we can see it, but when I look in the sky, I don't see the sun god driving a chariot, pulling the sun. Nor do I see Krishna as a super soul in the heart of the sun, directing the chariot. But I can understand intellectually that Krishna is pulling in the heart of the sun god. Otherwise, how is it possible that the sun is moving in such a precise orbit? I don't see it with my eyes, but I see it with my intelligence. Just like we may be in a room in the morning and the sun comes up. Now, I don't directly see the sun, but because the sun shines there, therefore I understand that the sun is there. Similarly, with our intelligence, we try to see things as they are, rather as my imagination presents itself to me. The scientists say that everything was by an accident. Just by accident, this huge sun has just happened to be moving in an orbit so that every morning we know exactly when the sun will rise, and every evening we know exactly when the sun will disappear for millions of years. Now, we don't know where we're going to be tomorrow. With all our intelligence, we don't know what's going to happen to us in 5 minutes from now. And yet the sun is moving with such precision. And if we don't understand there must be an intelligence behind that precision, then we don't take into account our own experience, that we're moving in this world in a rather irregular way, and yet the sun is moving in such precision. Just like if you have a watch, which is only a tool for measuring the precision of the sun, so if we imagine that the watch was manufactured out of nothing, it just happened to appear, and we don't recognize that there was someone in Switzerland or some other place who manufactured it, then we're less intelligent, that's all. Probably gives the example that when he was a child and they had this tram or train which would be moving, and Prabhupada thought that how is it possible? There must be a horse within the tram to move it. Because the experience was that things moved at that time because a horse moved them. He could not imagine that there can be a horseless carriage that would move anything. So similarly, we have to use our intelligence and understand that in our present conditioned state, we're not going to be able to perfectly understand that Krishna is the Supreme Person. It's just not possible because we're put into the prison of illusion. But we don't blindly accept that Krishna is God. nor do we blindly reject that he's God, but because we've gotten some vision, some intelligence, therefore we're using it to get out of our misconceptions of life. At the same time, we should understand we are in misconceptions of life. Otherwise, there's no means of making progress. In the material world, practically everyone thinks they're perfect already. Everything's great. They're doing everything perfectly. All they need is a little bit more money and their lives become more perfect. And therefore, the most perfect people in the world should be the richest people. But even from the material point of view, it's not true. So we understand we have our limitations, we have our conditioning, we have our misconceptions, we have our activities which are not so conducive towards our advancement spiritually. But still, we try to make some progress by following the process by which we can make progress towards understanding our eternality, taking more shelter, Paramatma, within the heart, and ultimately coming closer to Krishna by the processes given by Krishna that Paramatma is inspiring us to perform, such especially chanting Hare Krishna. Therefore, with that intelligence, we can make some progress towards experiencing more fully whether Krishna is the supreme or whether the process works, doesn't work or not. Therefore, this knowledge comes down into succession. Krishna spoke to Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna 5,000 years ago, and to be in the disciple succession, in other words, out of all the different means of experiencing Krishna, whether it be his riches or his strength or his fame or his renunciation, the one thing we can experience is his knowledge. If Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita and he's perfect, he knows everything in the past, present, and future, then what he speaks in Bhagavad Gita should be applicable to past, present, and future perfectly. Now, we may not realize everything, but if we can realize something, that we're not, Krishna says the body's changing, but we're not changing. Krishna says that there's a guide within our heart, who sometimes can be equated with our conscience. When we do something we know we're not supposed to do, then our conscience bothers us. So where does that come from? It's the super soul. Because that may be relative, but according to our social conceptions, but also Krishna is there as Paramatma, guiding us. Like every time I take a shower, Paramatma reminds me, pick up your iPhone so you can listen to a lecture of Srila Prabhupada. And my mind says, well, the iPhone's so far away, don't bother. Just take your shower. And I pick up the iPhone anyhow, even though it may be 10 feet away. You get to take 10 extra steps that day and listen to Prabhupada's lecture. Now, if I say, oh, Paramatma, don't bother me about this lecture, listening to a lecture, I'll survive without it. Then Paramatma says, all right, I won't remind you anymore. But every time I do it, Paramatma reminds me, and then next time he reminds me again. So Paramatma actually is our guide to help us perform the activities of devotional service. And if we question, why should I do it? Hopefully Paramatma will remind us of a happy experience we had in Krishna consciousness, something that was inspirational and enlightening. And then we think, yeah, that was a nice experience. Let me do it again. So the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, this is how we can understand Krishna is giving perfect knowledge as much as we can understand what's in the Bhagavad Gita, our eternality, the guidance of Paramatma, the logic of Krishna's existence. Or by performing the activities, then sometimes the beauty of the deities becomes more apparent. The logic of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita becomes clearer. The chanting becomes more pleasing. The devotees' relationships becomes more loving. And I can feel the difference in my consciousness when I remember Krishna and when I remember other things. So this is experience, and experience is faith, and faith inspires us to go further on with the process, perform it more and try to understand it more, and therefore experience what we call Krishna consciousness more. Now, this knowledge comes in parampara. In other words, to be in parampara means simply repeat what Krishna said. If Krishna's knowledge is perfect, and if what Krishna is saying in Bhagavad Gita is important, he doesn't talk about who's going to win the horse race in the year 2025. This is not Krishna's interest. That's not why he speaks Bhagavad Gita. Now, if he did happen to say that, we may not believe him. Even we hear from someone that we know that the horse race has been fixed, we may be doubtful and not put all our money on that horse. Because in this material relative world, there's no truth, which is absolute. Of course, I made from my personal experience in my life when I was a college student, I had some job working in a grocery store, which I didn't like so much. But I decided, my friend told me this horse was going to win. So I put my $50 on the horse, and the horse won. And it gave me enough money to provide for my maintenance for the next so many months during the summer season. And then he told me the horse was going to run again, and I put my money on the horse again, and it won. But during the horse race, I was a little doubtful whether it was going to win, although it won. So that's called relative. And I just so happens that I have a perfect record of gambling. So I gambled twice in my life, and I won twice. But I'm not going to do it again. So in the material world, we were always doubtful. It doesn't matter how guaranteed it is. Guaranteed or your money back. How many people have tried to get their money back after a guarantee of 100%? I don't know. But in the absolute world, Krishna's knowledge is absolute. And Paramatma, Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, this is absolute knowledge. And those who are repeating exactly what Krishna says, emphasizing Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, Prabhupada, sometimes in order to gain his audience, he talked about other things, but not with the idea of, for instance, Prabhupada was talking to one race car driver in England, and for 20 minutes or so, or 10 minutes, he talked about race cars with this man. Now, Prabhupada really had not an intense interest in race cars. He did have an interest in helping this man who's a professional race car driver understand Krishna consciousness. And as we know, when people speak philosophy, most of us fall asleep right away. What to speak of a non-devotee who has no idea what this is all about. Go on the street and tell people, dear sir, please take this book. It tells you you're not your body. See how many people have an intense interest of understanding that they're not their body. It's very difficult to sell books like that. But if you talk about how many children you have, and they say, I have 3 children, you go, wow, you got a good family there. If you talk about what kind of work you do, I'm an engineer. Wow, are you a good engineer? If you relate to things that people believe that they have interest in, then it's much more likely they'll be receptive to the message. So sometimes Srila Prabhupada talked about things that people had interest in only so he could introduce Krishna consciousness to them in a way that they'd be receptive. And that means that Prabhupada sometimes said different things to different people according to their time, place, and audience. But was all the purpose was bhakti samshanat, how to distribute Krishna consciousness to them. Therefore, we have to understand that this knowledge is absolute in Bhagavad Gita. It may not be of interest to most people because they've lost their intelligence for different reasons. And therefore, for ourselves, we have to use our intelligence, which will be supplied by Paramatma, try to perform the activities of devotional service. And one of the main activities is to take shelter of the parampara. Because Krishna spoke to Arjuna 5,000 years ago, but because Krishna is not present now, he has his representatives. And a representative of Krishna means they repeat exactly the same message of Krishna. There's no need to add anything. There's no need to take away anything. We don't have to tell, as they asked Prabhupada, can you show us a mystic power? And Prabhupada pointed to his disciples and said, this is my mystic power. Before there were hippies engaged in all kinds of activities, but now they're Vaishnavas dancing and chanting Hare Krishna. So that's my mystic power. So that's the mystic power we're interested in. Not who's going to win the horse race, how to manufacture gold, where the jiva came from. This is not what we're so much interested in. We're interested in understanding our eternal, guided by Paramatma to come back to our eternal relation with Krishna, of which we all have an eternal relation with Krishna, a loving relationship that we're looking for. That's the purpose of life, of a devotee's life. Other people may have another purpose. But for those who are interested in becoming Krishna conscious, who have that purpose of life, that's why Krishna speaks Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. Because Arjuna is Krishna's friend, and he's a devotee, and he has an interest in becoming Krishna conscious, and therefore Bhagavad Gita will be a valuable asset to those who are seeking to revive their relation with Krishna. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Natalia. Natasha.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for this lecture, and I'm super happy to see you after such a long break. It's very nice, and I also received some photos of you with other swamis from Brindavan, I think, was it, or Mayapur? It was just very nice. I'm just super happy, and also I'm very grateful to Agnihotra Prabhu for letting us know that there is again an option to participate in lectures. And my question is, sometimes we are not, we don't have a right, or like it's not recommended to chastise others, but sometimes we get chastised by others. And if we have an intention to chastise someone, that's like egoistic and not proper. But when we get chastised by others, it's usually received as a divine message, or so to say. So how come? How is that possible?
Well, I mean, depends on our consciousness. What you're describing is very nice. Not everyone has that vision or that desire to get chastised by others. One usually has a desire to chastise others, but becomes very disturbed if one winds up being chastised. And it depends. I mean, if our parents are chastising us because we're chanting Hare Krishna, then we can't really take them so seriously. If someone's chastising us because, we stepped on the deities, then that may be worthy of taking into account, becoming more careful. So we do have to use our intelligence and make sure and see what the lesson that's being presented to me. That's true for everything. Not only when people verbally chastise us, but the very living in the material world, Maya is there and she's chastising us. When we, you know, go out into the rain without proper protection and we get sick, then we should understand that Maya is chastising us. But she's chastising us to give us the intelligence to bring a raincoat or at least an umbrella. So that's also kind of a chastisement by the material energy. Others, they may warn us, like our mother may be saying, you know, bring an umbrella or a raincoat. So even our mothers and our fathers or our friends, they also may be representatives of Paramatma trying to give us some intelligence, how to live properly in the material world. Come in. Hold on. So we have to see what is the lesson? What is material nature telling me? What are others, representatives, telling me? And then see what the lesson is so we can learn it.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for the question. Anything else?
I have a question. Um, momento. Maharaj, what do you do when a couple grihasta live together? So how can they practice Krishna consciousness? It sounds very difficult. Men and women live together. How can they avoid breaking the principles and following nicely and trying at least to remain spiritual?
Bill probably gives the example in the Vaikuntha planets that men and women are more beautiful than they are here. And the only way they remain in Krishna consciousness because they practice Krishna consciousness. They hear and chant about Krishna, they worship Krishna, they hear about Krishna, they serve Krishna, and that way they get spiritual strength. After all, the material nature was so attractive, and it is attractive. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here since time immemorial. But it was so attractive, then why would anyone want to make any progress to have another experience? Only if we're fortunate enough to have another experience above material sense gratification, can we actually make some progress out of sense gratification? Otherwise, in the material world, Maya is very strong. She's captivated unlimited living entities since time immemorial, because there must be some happiness in material sense gratification. But if it was so much happiness in material sense gratification, then when we go on the street in the cities or anywhere else, everyone would be jumping in ecstasy, thinking about how much they're enjoying their senses. But if you look at most people, like sometimes I come back from the Ayurvedic doctor, which I go to, we pass by a school. And all the students, every time I see them who go into school, because I come exactly at that time, they all seem very morose. So if it was so ecstatic going to school and learning about how to gratify one's senses, how to make money to gratify the senses. Why are they so morose all the time? There was so much ecstasy in it. On the other hand, people are surprised when they pass by Harinam, these simple people with just robes on sometimes, but they're chanting and dancing and distributing books, and they seem very enlivened and happy. And yet they're not making any money, or very little of it sometimes. So why is it just merely chanting and dancing makes them so happy? They're not getting paid for it. And yet people who are working hard, getting so much money to enjoy their senses, they're morose. So we have to see from the practical point of view. Yes, because we're conditioned souls, sometimes we may be led astray by our senses, but that's not permanent. That's just temporary. As long as we keep on chanting Hare Krishna, then gradually we'll get the spiritual strength that these things will not be so significant anymore. Prabhupada gives the example, if you're a child and you learn to walk, then you may fall down sometimes. But after some practice, then you can actually learn how to walk steadily. And eventually you become so expert at walking, you can learn how to dance in ecstasy. So some experience may be there. But as long as one is chanting Hare Krishna, then gradually one will get the spiritual strength to overcome being simply forced to perform the activities for sense gratification, which have some happiness, but not there. It's only very flickering and very temporary compared to the possible happiness one can experience by the practice of sadhana bhakti and Krishna consciousness. So the point is that householders, Prabhupada said, morning and evening, they should chant Hare Krishna together, hear from each other about Krishna, worship the deities and offer their food, and gradually they'll get the spiritual strength. So they'll be able to actually develop more love for Krishna. And as they develop love for Krishna, they'll develop more love for each other also. And the tendency towards exploiting each other will diminish, and the love will increase for one's husband and wife and family. It won't diminish. It'll actually mature, that's all. What does Prabhupada say in one lecture? Just like family. So it does not mean that you have to turn your attachment. Therefore, your family attachment should be withdrawn. No, it will be polished. The family attachment will be polished. If you train your family in Krishna consciousness, just early in the morning, rise up. You can control your family in that way. Now get up, take your bath, have Mangalarti. Then chant Hare Krishna. Read Bhagavad Gita. Take prasad and go to the office or work. So in this way, if your mind is in Krishna, if you act accordingly, it is perfection. Stane stita shutigatam navang manobir. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanande.
Hari Hari Bol. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prahladananda Swami.
Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you,
Hare
Prabhuji.
Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kumari. Thank you, Agnihotra Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mari Kumari. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Om.